relation between the being as lived through, quote unquote lived through, experience, not even experience, that is persistent through. Like the rock is within itself, if that makes sense. The being of a being, we can say. The relation between that and the being of the non-being of the being, or you may say, the thing that we don't know if it's true or not, but it has a sort of Platonic form, if you may even consider that. It has a sort of being to it, almost in semantical terms, right? But something that is not really experienced through by the first being, right? So think of that, like another way to put this is like, I am here, I am living through me, and then there is the rock which I do not live through. But this is not in terms of consciousness, it's in terms of implications, of almost semantics, almost mathematics. Can a concept indicate something else that it is not? That is a fundamental question. The relation between itself, the it and itself, and the non-it, which is not the other's itself. Now, what seems to be the case when we view this is it's an asymmetric relation. The being of the being of the being implies the being of the non-being of the being, but the being of the non-being of the being does not imply the being of the being of the being. Now, the being of the non-being of the being can, I suppose, imply the being of the non-being of the being, as in it can imply itself, but the being of the being of the being does not imply the being of the being of the being, at least insofar as it's a different being. What do I just mean? A thing implies something else. That something else implies itself, but that something else does not imply the original thing, and the original thing does not imply the original thing insofar as that original thing is something else. It's an asymmetric polyadic relation, I suppose. But this relation is primarily important because not in terms of what something implies towards the other, but what the other factor can be implied by. It is on the receiving end of the relation, if that makes any sense. The master, it's not just something is the master of, it's more like I am this and there's a master over me, if that makes any sense. So in this, it's not just something implies something, it's more like the other thing is being able to be implied by something, if that makes any sense. So that's the interesting question. So how does that relate to being and non-being? See, that's the interesting point. Because if the being can imply the non-being, the non-being cannot imply the being, well, it seems quite unfair, right? But why is it that the being implies the non-being in the first place? Well, it's really because of what you may call a horizon, a grid, metaphysical community, just the ability of something. If you were to admit that something is, you must admit that there is something that is not it. But the problem when you admit that something is not it, you must imply that there is something that it is not something. Existence and nothing is, like, it's kind of a weird statement, but basically the being, again, the being of the non-being of the being, right? So basically this whole thing is you can refer to non-being things. So fundamentally what you have at the end is that nothing is ever able to exist in individuality. There must always be, at least conceptually speaking, something else, even if that something else is literally nothing. That is why it implies it. But something that is not, the being of the non-being of the being, something that is not the case, that can never imply anything. Why, you may say, because it's essentially a being, and it's always a metaphysical community. But the important part is, it can imply something only if we're viewing it in the terms that it is experienced through. Not necessarily consciously, but actually is. It's a really weird concept. Like, the four-sided triangle, let's just say. If the perspective is as if it is lived through, as it is persisted through by something, as if it is through something, then yes, that can imply the metaphysical community. But that in itself, not viewed in terms of if it can be experienced through, cannot imply anything else because there's nothing there, right? No matter if it's a constellation statement, the force at a triangle or whatever. But that's the important point here, is that B not being in the asymmetric polyadic relation. Oh my god. Ice. Gotta be careful, because it's not by cops. Fucking stop sensor. Anyway, that's good. Yeah.